The Galactic Council convened once again in the vast and shining dome of the Eclipsium starport, a towering station orbiting the black hole at the center of the galaxy. The station was an architectural marvel, its spire-like towers piercing the dark expanse of space while artificial gravity kept the delegates and their entourages grounded. The Council's Grand Hall, a circular structure of silvery metal and intricate holograms, was designed to impress all who entered, reminding them of the unity and power of the galaxy's most influential species. Every species of importance in the known universe had representatives present. Tall avians with luminous wings, delicate insectoid beings with exoskeletons gleaming in the artificial lights, crystalline entities that flickered and hummed with energy, and sentient plants whose organic bodies adapted to the station's air. But as the meeting commenced, all eyes were on the humans. The human delegation had been growing in importance over the last few centuries. Once considered primitive and chaotic, humanity had risen through the ranks of galactic diplomacy. They were fierce warriors, brilliant engineers, and more recently, highly effective diplomats. But there was something that baffled the other species about their presence at every council meeting: the humans' guards. Every time they entered the council chambers, the human diplomats were accompanied by towering, silent figures, soldiers who were dressed in military-style uniforms, their faces stern and unreadable. But there was one strange fact about them that never failed to intrigue the other members of the council. They carried no weapons, no energy blades, no plasma rifles, no personal shields, nothing. The lack of weapons among the human guards had become a topic of constant curiosity. At first it had been dismissed as an oddity, a quirk of human tradition, or a sign of their confidence, but as tensions between the different species grew, as the stakes of intergalactic politics escalated, the absence of weapons in the human security detail began to feel more like an enigma, one that needed solving. Why would a species so well known for their military prowess choose to send unarmed soldiers to the most dangerous political arena in the galaxy? Were the humans simply naive, trusting their alliances and agreements too much? Or was there something more to this unusual decision? As the latest council meeting began, the grand hall buzzed with whispers of the same question. The other species exchanged quiet words of speculation, and yet, despite their collective curiosity, no one had dared to ask the humans directly until now. At the head of the hall, a figure who commanded the attention of every delegate rose to speak. The Eldrosian High Judge Tarlnak, a towering creature with long, gnarled limbs and smooth obsidian skin, stood and addressed the council. His voice, low and resonant, carried an air of absolute authority. Tarlnak was one of the most respected figures in the Galactic Council, a being whose wisdom had guided many of the galaxy's most important decisions. If anyone had the power to raise the uncomfortable question, it was him. "I propose an inquiry," Judge Tarlnak said, his words cutting through the murmurs that had been circulating the chamber. "We have allowed this strange anomaly to persist for far too long. Why do the humans refuse to arm their guards?" A hush fell over the chamber, and all eyes turned toward the human delegation. Vela Jor, the lead ambassador for the humans, sat silently at the central table. She was tall, with sharp features and an air of confidence that came from years of navigating the complex web of galactic diplomacy. Her hair, cropped short, shimmered a soft silver under the station's lights. Beside her stood her personal guard, Sergeant Markel, who, as always, was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in the same plain uniform as the other guards, but what stood out was the absence of a weapon in his hands or at his side. The room fell silent as Vela slowly stood to address the council. Her movements were deliberate and composed. She paused for a moment, taking in the weight of the gazes on her before speaking. "We have heard this question many times, High Judge," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and we have always answered it with the same truth. Our guards do not carry weapons because they do not need to." The statement hung in the air, and it seemed to baffle the assembled delegates even more. The Eldrosians, especially, exchanged looks of confusion. In their society, the possession of weapons was not just a matter of practicality. It was a symbol of strength, of status. The idea that a military guard could function effectively without the tools of their trade was nearly incomprehensible to them. The silence stretched on for a long moment before Tarlnak spoke again, his tone now sharper. "And yet, you bring them into a room filled with beings who have proven time and again their capacity for violence. You trust these unarmed soldiers to protect you, to protect your diplomats, and to maintain order in this chamber? What makes you so certain that they are capable of such a task?" Bella's gaze flickered briefly to Sergeant Michael, who stood immobilely beside her. Then she turned back to the council, her eyes unwavering. "We do not rely on brute force, High Judge. The human mind is our true weapon. The statement sent another ripple through the council. The Xantor, an insectoid species known for their complex mental faculties, buzzed nervously in their seats. The crystalline beings flickered, their forms shimmering with an almost imperceptible energy. The other delegates were clearly unsettled by this answer. There was an unspoken rule in the galaxy: strength and power were demonstrated through weapons, technology, and physical prowess, but the humans were claiming something far more abstract, something far more dangerous. Talnak leaned forward, his many eyes narrowing as he regarded Vela. "What do you mean by this? Are you suggesting that your guards possess some sort of psychic ability, some means of influencing others without physical contact?" Vela's expression remained calm, but there was a glimmer of something darker in her eyes. "Yes, Judge, that is exactly what I'm suggesting. We do not need weapons to enforce our will. We possess something far more effective." Sergeant Markel stepped forward, his movements as precise as always, and raised a hand. The room seemed to shift, just a little, as if the air itself had become thicker, more charged. Then, without warning, a holographic projection sprang to life above the central table, casting strange blue light across the room. The image was a series of simulations showing human soldiers in various combat situations, but the weapons they used were not guns or blades, they were gestures, small, subtle movements, barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Vela spoke again. "This is an ancient human technique called force resonance. It is the ability to influence the thoughts and emotions of others using only the power of the mind." The hologram displayed a human soldier entering a hostile enemy camp. Despite the presence of fully armed soldiers, the human did not draw a weapon. Instead, with a small shift of his stance, his body language alone seemed to radiate an aura of confidence and control. Slowly, the hostile soldiers began to lower their weapons. Their stances became more relaxed, their aggression fading. "This is the power of influence," Vela continued. "Through years of discipline, training, and mental conditioning, a human can subtly manipulate the emotions and thoughts of others. It is not mind control, at least not in the way you might think. Rather, it is the ability to influence and calm, to sway others' actions by altering their perception of reality." The Aldrosians, who were traditionally a species of great physical strength, leaned forward, their limbs stiff with curiosity. They exchanged uncertain glances, while the insectoids shifted in their seats, their antennae flicking nervously. The Exanto, whose species relied on deep mental connections, appeared fascinated, though some of them seemed wary of the implications. "This technique is not perfect," Markel added, his voice low but clear. "It requires training, precision, and complete control. And even then, it is not always foolproof. But it is effective," Vela nodded. "Our guards are trained not to use force but to de-escalate violence before it happens. They do not rely on weapons because they have something far more powerful: their ability to manipulate the emotions and thoughts of those around them. In this way, they can prevent conflict without ever drawing a weapon." The room fell into stunned silence. The delegates looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The implications of this revelation were staggering. For centuries, the galaxy had operated on the principle that power was demonstrated through strength, through weapons, through technology. The humans were now claiming to possess a power that was invisible, untangible, and yet potentially far more dangerous than any weapon. Judge Talnak's voice broke the silence. "This power, this ability to influence the mind, how far does it extend? Could it be used to control entire populations, to manipulate the will of entire species?" Vela's eyes darkened. "It is not a weapon to be wielded carelessly. We use it in defense, in peacekeeping, and as a last resort. We do not manipulate minds for the sake of domination. We use it to maintain peace." The room was still, each delegate processing the weight of what had just been revealed. The idea of a weapon that could manipulate the mind was both horrifying and alluring. For some, it was a potential tool to ensure peace across the galaxy. For others, it was a terrifying possibility, one that could spell the end of true freedom and autonomy. And in the back of the chamber, Sergeant Markel remained motionless, his mind focused, the air around him still humming with the faintest ripple of mental energy. To him, this was not new. It was the way of his people, a way that had kept them alive in the chaos of galactic politics, a way that had kept them from being destroyed by those who valued only strength and weapons. But as the council continued to murmur and discuss, he knew that the true test of humanity's power had only just begun. And it would not come in the chambers of the Galactic Council. It would come out there, beyond the reach of the Council's influence, where the future of the galaxy hung in the balance and where the true strength of the human mind would be tested. The chamber remained still for several moments, as though time itself had paused in the wake of the revelation. Vela stood at the center of the room, surrounded by the attentive yet uneasy gazes of the council members. Her words had cut through the air with the sharpness of a blade, and now every mind in the room was wrestling with the implications. Sergeant Markel remained silent at her side, his eyes scanning the room, unmoving, his expression unreadable. He was used to this kind of scrutiny. This was not the first time his people had been examined with suspicion, but even he felt the weight of the moment. He knew that the humans had just laid bare something incredibly powerful, something that could alter the balance of power within the galaxy. And yet, despite the stir of tension in the air, Vela remained calm. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, prepared for the inevitable questions that would arise. The humans had always known that their ability to influence minds was a closely guarded secret, one that they only revealed to those they deemed worthy of the knowledge. And now that secret had been forced into the open. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy depended on how the Council, each species with their own prejudices and histories, responded to it. Talnak's voice shattered the silence, his tone lower than before, but no less authoritative. You claim that your soldiers use this power to prevent violence and maintain peace, but that is a dangerous assumption. Peace in this galaxy is often built on the threat of force. We live in a world where power is tangible, where weapons are a guarantee of safety. You are suggesting that we should place our trust in something intangible, something we cannot even see or measure? Can we as a council trust that the humans will use this ability responsibly? Or will you too fall prey to the temptation of controlling minds, of bending others to your will? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Vela's eyes did not waver. She had anticipated this challenge. This was the heart of the matter, the fear that had been brewing ever since the humans had first introduced their unarmed guards to the council. It was the fear of losing control, of a species having the ability to influence others in ways that were invisible, undetectable, and ultimately unaccountable. I understand your concerns, Judge Talnak, Vela said, her voice steady but firm. But you must understand, we have no desire to control anyone. This ability, this mind influence as you call it, is not something we wield for personal gain or political leverage. It is a tool we use to ensure peace. We use it to prevent conflict, not to provoke it. And while it is true that it could be used irresponsibly, I assure you we do not take that responsibility lightly. Our soldiers, our diplomats are trained from an early age to control their ability, to exercise them only when absolutely necessary. The Aldrosians, who had remained silent up until now, exchanged glances, their long limbs shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their species, proud and warlike, were known for their tactical brilliance and the sheer strength of their physical forms. For them, peace was achieved through dominance, through strength. To them, the idea that peace could be maintained without the threat of violence seemed like a naive, even reckless notion. This power you speak of, Tarnak continued, his voice carrying an undercurrent of skepticism, does it extend only to your soldiers? Or could it be used by anyone among your species? How many of your people are capable of using it? And if it is a skill that is so easily mastered, what is to stop it from spreading to those who would use it for less noble purposes? Vela's gaze flickered for a moment, but she held Talnak's gaze, her expression unshaken. It is not an ability that can be easily mastered. It requires years of mental conditioning and training. Only a small fraction of the human population is capable of it. And even then, it is a skill that must be carefully honed. We do not allow just anyone to use it. There are strict protocols in place to ensure that those who are trained in this ability do so with the utmost responsibility. But how can you be certain that these protocols will always be followed? Talnok pressed. What if one of your own decides to use this power for personal gain? What if a rogue element within your species decides to manipulate the minds of others for their own agenda? The room seemed to grow even colder as the council's members absorbed the implications of Tarlanak's words. The idea that someone could subvert the delicate balance of power with nothing but their thoughts was a terrifying one. The Threxian ambassador, a species known for their deep empathy and telepathic abilities, spoke up, his voice quiet but filled with concern. This ability you describe, the Threxian said, his multi-limbed body shifting as his antennae twitched nervously. It sounds like a form of telepathy, and while we are a telepathic species ourselves, we know how easily such power can corrupt. Our own people once wielded such abilities in the past. only to have them exploited by a few individuals who sought to control others. We understand the dangers you speak of. The temptation to control, to dominate, can be overwhelming. Vela nodded, acknowledging the weight of the Thraxian's words. She knew that her species' abilities were not without risks. The potential for misuse was always there, but she believed, deep down, that humanity had learned from the mistakes of the past. They had seen the damage that unchecked power could do, both within their own species and in the broader galaxy. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the destruction wrought by those who sought to control others through violence and manipulation. Humanity had chosen a different path, one where the mind, not the weapon, was the tool for peace. "I understand the risks," Vela said, her voice steady. "But I also believe that we have learned to control them. We have no desire to impose our will on others. We believe that peace is best achieved through understanding, through cooperation. We do not seek to dominate, we seek to protect. And if that means using our abilities to diffuse a potential conflict before it even begins, then we will do so. But only when necessary." There was a long pause as the council members took in her words. Some remained skeptical, others uneasy, and a few appeared deep in thought. The Xantor, known for their highly developed mental senses, were particularly quiet, their antennae flicking back and forth in a way that suggested they were trying to comprehend the full scope of what had been revealed. They understood the power of the mind better than most, but even they seemed unsure about the consequences of such an ability being wielded by another species. After a tense moment, Talnak spoke again, his voice now tempered with caution. "If what you say is true, if this power exists, then it is both a gift and a curse. It could bring great peace, but it could also be abused. I would be remiss if I did not ask for further assurances, Ambassador. What safeguards have you put in place to ensure that this power will not be used recklessly? How can we, the Galactic Council, ensure that your species does not slip into the very behavior that we fear, the use of mind control as a weapon?" Vela's lips pressed into a thin line, but she did not flinch. "We have a council within humanity's ranks, an oversight body dedicated to ensuring that those with these abilities use them responsibly. This council is made up of individuals from various sectors of human society, diplomats, military officials, psychologists, and even philosophers. They work together to monitor the use of these abilities and ensure that they are never used for personal gain or to manipulate others." "And how do we know that this council will always act in the best interest of the galaxy?" Tarunak asked. "What guarantees do we have that the humans will not use this ability to exert control over us, over the other species?" The question hung in the air, a challenge that seemed almost impossible to answer. Vela's mind raced as she searched for the right words. She knew that no matter what she said, there would always be doubt. The fear of mind control was ingrained in the minds of many species. It was a fear that transcended species boundaries, a primal fear of losing one's autonomy, of being unable to trust others. "We cannot guarantee that there will never be misuse," Vela said at last, her voice quiet but resolute. "But we can guarantee that we will do everything in our power to prevent it. Humanity has learned from its past mistakes, from the dangers of unchecked power. We will not fall into the same trap again, and we will not let our abilities destroy the trust we have worked so hard to build with the other species." The room was silent once more, the weight of her words hanging over the council. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions. The decision before them was not just about the humans' ability to wield this power, it was about the future of the galaxy itself. Would they trust humanity to use this power responsibly, or would the fear of the unknown outweigh the potential for peace? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Taranach spoke, his voice softer than before. "We have much to consider, Ambassador. This revelation changes everything. The balance of power within the galaxy will never be the same, and we must ensure that this ability does not become a weapon in the wrong hands. But for now, we will continue this discussion. We will deliberate." Vela nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders, though she knew that the true battle was far from over. The Council was not yet convinced, and she would have to continue defending humanity's place in the galaxy, but for now she had done what she could, and as the meeting drew to a close, she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The true test had only just begun. The days following the council meeting were tense, charged with a quiet but palpable sense of uncertainty. The Galactic Council had adjourned without a clear resolution on the matter of humanity's mind influence abilities, but the seeds of doubt and curiosity had been planted. Every species had retreated to their respective spaces, their embassies and their chambers, and now they were all deliberating what to do with this new and potentially dangerous knowledge. Wroshar, along with Sergeant Markel and the rest of her delegation, had returned to the human embassy on Eclipsium starport, but even here the uncertainty lingered. Vela paced the length of her private office, her hands clasped behind her back. She had been working in diplomacy for over 2 decades, and yet this was unlike any challenge she had faced before. The fear and suspicion in the council chamber had been palpable, and she knew that many species were still processing what they had learned about humanity's hidden power. Even the most rational minds could not help but be afraid of what was now known. The fear of mind manipulation had always been a universal constant among species. The idea that another species could influence thoughts, control emotions, or even dictate actions without the use of weapons was a terrifying one. And now that humanity had openly admitted to possessing such a power, the galaxy was on edge. Markel, who had been standing at attention near the door, spoke in his usual deep, calm voice. "We've done what we could. Now we wait." Vela nodded without turning around, her gaze fixed on the holographic display in front of her. It flickered with images from the recent council meeting, moments frozen in time like ghosts in the void. The expressions of shock, the raised brows, the silent murmurs of disbelief, each was etched into her memory. "It's not enough, Markel," she said quietly. "We've exposed ourselves, and now the galaxy is questioning whether we can be trusted." He said nothing for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. "Trust is something you build over time, Ambassador, but it can be lost in an instant. You've given them the truth. You've shown them the responsibility we place on this power. Now it's up to them to decide." Vela turned to face him, her expression firm but weary. "And what if they decide we're too dangerous? What if the Threxian ambassador is right? What if we're not ready for this kind of power? What if it's too much for any one species to control?" Markel's gaze softened ever so slightly. He understood her concerns. He had seen humanity's dark history, the wars they had fought, the empires they had built and torn down. It was easy to forget how close humanity had come to losing its way in the past, to becoming a species driven purely by ambition, fear, and power. But those days were behind them. The discipline of force resonance, the mental conditioning that had kept it under control for centuries, was humanity's greatest triumph. It had prevented the kind of reckless chaos that had once plagued them. "We've chosen this path, Ambassador," Markel said at last. "We've chosen peace over domination. No matter what the Council decides, we cannot lose sight of that." Vela nodded but said nothing. She had always believed in the power of cooperation, in the potential for understanding between species, but she was also a realist. The Council was a delicate balance of conflicting interests, each species with its own agenda. Would they see humanity's power as a gift or a threat? The next few days would be crucial. The decision came the following week, not through the formal channels of the Council, but in the form of a private communique delivered to the human delegation on Eclipsium starport. It was from the Eldrosian High Judge Tarnak, the very figure who had questioned Vela during the meeting. His message was brief but clear. A special session of the Council would convene, and humanity was to be put to the test. The humans were being given an ultimatum: demonstrate that their mind influence abilities could be used for the greater good, or face the possibility of being ostracized from the Council. The stakes were high. This session was not just another diplomatic meeting. It was a trial, a test that would determine humanity's future role in the galaxy. The pressure was immediate, crushing even. The eyes of the galaxy would be upon them. The tension between the species had already been simmering for centuries, and this revelation threatened to tip the balance. If humanity failed to prove itself, if they faltered in this moment of reckoning, the repercussions could be catastrophic. For centuries, the Council had operated on the assumption that all species adhered to a similar understanding of power. Now, humanity's secret was out in the open, and the Council was divided. Some believed humanity had the potential to usher in a new era of peace. Others feared that their power could destabilize the galaxy. Vela and Markel found themselves standing once again in the Council chamber, surrounded by representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species. The chamber had been redesigned for this special session, its polished floor gleaming under the bright lights. The seats were arranged in a circle, and the large central table, where the ambassadors usually sat, was replaced with a projection system that hovered above the floor, displaying holographic data and images of various intergalactic incidents. Vela, who had spent most of her career negotiating and strategizing, now found herself on the precipice of the greatest diplomatic challenge of her life. To her left, Markel stood as a silent pillar, a reminder that the human delegation's strength did not lie in weapons, but in their ability to influence, to understand, and to control their own minds. To her right, the other ambassadors sat with their eyes fixed on her, waiting for her to make the first move. They were skeptical, uncertain, yet curious. Tarnak, the Eldrosian High Judge, rose to address the assembly. His towering figure cast a long shadow across the room, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of authority. "Ambassador Velajur of the human delegation," he began, his tone measured. "You stand before us today not just as a representative of your people, but as a species with a power unlike any other in the galaxy. We have heard your words, we have seen the simulations, but today you will demonstrate the extent of this power. We will see if humanity truly has the capacity to control it." Vela felt her heart race in her chest, but she held her ground. She had expected this. This was the moment she had been preparing for. "We do not ask for your trust, Judge Talnak," she said, her voice steady. "We ask for your understanding. The power we possess is not one we wield lightly, and it is not one that can be used recklessly. We believe in the good of this galaxy, and we believe that we can be a force for peace. But you must see this power for what it truly is." With a nod, Martel stepped forward, and the central projection system came to life. He displayed images of previous conflicts on instances where violence had been threatened, where military force had been on the verge of erupting. One by one, they were displayed for all to see. The fragile peace on the border of Thraxian space, the tense negotiations with the Xantor, the political unrest on the icy moon of Galavon. Each image told the story of a conflict that could have spiraled into war. But then a new image appeared, a human soldier standing in the middle of a room full of armed individuals. His body was tense, his eyes focused, and his posture commanding. But there was no weapon in his hands. He did not speak, did not raise his voice. Instead, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Subtly but unmistakably. The armed figures in the room began to lower their weapons, their bodies relaxing, their aggression fading. The video was short, a mere few seconds, but it demonstrated the concept clearly. "This is how we use our abilities," Vela explained. "We do not manipulate minds for personal gain. We influence emotions, actions, thoughts, not to control, but to de-escalate. The soldier is using force resonance to calm a potentially volatile situation. In this way, we avoid violence without ever raising a weapon." The images flickered as the projections changed. Several other cases appeared, each demonstrating a different aspect of humanity's mind influence in action. There were no grandiose displays of power, no dramatic shows of control. Instead, the demonstrations were simple, quiet, and subtle. Human soldiers acting as mediators in heated situations, guiding the emotions of others, influencing decisions with nothing more than a glance, a gesture, or a shift in posture. The ability was less about direct control and more about harmonizing conflict before it could escalate. The room fell silent as the last projection faded. Vela's gaze moved across the chamber, meeting the eyes of every ambassador, every judge, every council member. She could feel their eyes on her, weighing the humanity she represented, calculating whether they could afford to trust a species with this power. Tarnak was the first to speak. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Your demonstrations have been impressive, Ambassador, but as you well know, it is one thing to control an individual or a small group. It is another to manage large-scale conflict. What if your methods fail? What if there are those who resist your influence? What then?" Vela's expression remained calm, though she felt the pressure mounting. "No technique is foolproof. We understand the risks, but we have faced these challenges before. Our methods are not absolute, but they have proven effective in countless situations." "And what of the future?" Talnak pressed. "If humanity expands further, if your power grows unchecked, what then?" Vela's answer was simple, but it came from deep within. "We will control it. We will ensure that it is used for peace, not war. This is the path we have chosen, and we will not deviate from it." The council chamber fell into silence once more. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. The decision would not be made today, but the seed had been planted. The galaxy was watching, and the path ahead was uncertain. For better or for worse, humanity had revealed its greatest secret, and now it was time for the universe to decide whether they would be a force for peace or destruction. The test had only just begun.